Missouri has a true freshman third-string quarterback facing the undefeated number 3 team in the country. And yet the Tigers are 7-point underdogs.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And Missouri basketball did win its opener on the road at Howard yesterday in Washington, D.C. A lot of good things, but a couple of concerns as well. I'll break it all down for you a little later in the program. Also, that Texas A&M defense, despite a couple of notable results, I think is a lot better, well, certainly than I thought, and probably than you think too. And before I start the show, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. I got to say, speaking of one of my other sponsors, over at FanDuel, 7-point game, Missouri getting 7 points, of course, in Columbia. And I have to say, like I alluded to in the open there, a third stringer in Matt Zollers, a true freshman in Matt Zollers. That is a lot of respect for Missouri, and I can totally understand why on a couple of different levels at least. Number one, that Missouri defense, I think, is completely legitimate. And if anything, it's probably playing better football as the season goes along here, I think. Sure, you can look at the statistics and maybe question that. You also have to adjust for opponent a little bit. I think the massive explosive plays that tended to pop up in the early September part of the season is mostly gone away here in October. So hopefully that trend will continue into November for the Tigers. But also, you got to say, Missouri, its offense over the last couple games in particular, and Alabama as well, I would say, but in particular, Auburn and Vanderbilt, well, the Missouri offense has been stuck in the mud a little bit. The Missouri run game, I think, is one that everybody still respects. And yet, you play against a really elite defense like Auburn, and, well, Missouri's offensive line did not win the battle in that ball game. So I'll just say this, Texas A&M, it seems like the perception, I'll just say my perception too, has been that they're an offensive-oriented type of team. But I'll tell you this, looking at especially the more advanced type of statistics that are pace neutral and factors in opponent, you know what, compared to the rest of the SEC in particular, that A&M defense is a lot more impressive statistically than I thought it was going to be. And I think really recently Texas A&M played a ball game against Arkansas where they won 45-42, of course giving up 42 points to the lowly Arkansas Razorbacks got a lot of people's attention. I think that's been skewing my perception, I'll just say, of Texas A&M's defense a little bit. But of course, Arkansas, yes, they are the high variance hogs. That means that they're going to have high variance and, yes, way down here variance sometimes too. Well, I think in that particular game, Talon Green and the Arkansas Razorbacks, well, obviously that was on the good side. A few less turnovers, that type of thing. They're still a formidable opponent, despite the fact that I and Missouri fans like to, well, laugh at a lot of their problems. Sorry, John Neighbors, though. Not really. But in all seriousness, though, the thing with Texas A&M is I do think that we're probably underrating. I'll just say I have been underrating Texas A&M's defense and maybe overrating their offense ever so slightly. Again, that Notre Dame result is probably skewing our perceptions a little bit to a 41-40 win in South Bend. But for some reason, most people aren't thinking about the Auburn game, probably because it wasn't on national television in prime time like that Texas A&M Notre Dame game was. But the next week, a very similar result to what Missouri had against Auburn, and this was at Kyle Field, the Aggies winning 16-10 over Auburn, definitely solidifying my thoughts on that Auburn Tiger defense. I also think it's very possible that this Missouri defense can get to this Texas A&M offense in a way that maybe other opponents have not. I think Marcel Reed, the A&M quarterback, is a good player. I just don't think he's a great player yet. In fact, his skill set reminds me a little bit of Brady Cook in that he can run the football, and I think he's safe with the football, doesn't throw a lot of interceptions, and especially in Reed's case, he doesn't take a lot of sacks, so they tend to keep hammering the football forward. And with those two transfer wide receivers, Mario Craver from Mississippi State, KC Concepcion from NC State, well, they've really juiced that deep ball game for Marcel Reed and company and taken what was kind of a game manager type offense under Reed, at least that was my perception last year, and really added that explosive element to it on the outside. So the thing is, once again, if A&M doesn't take a lot of sacks, well, Missouri can at least do a good job of making Marcel Reed get rid of the football early, tuck the ball and run it, maybe before he wants to. And I do think there's a decent chance that, hey, by the way, especially based on the totals over at FanDuel, I think you could be looking at a fairly low-scoring game here. So the question is, can Missouri's offense with Matt Zollers, by the way, that Missouri offense looked a little bit better when Zollers came in against Vanderbilt a couple weeks ago. Will that happen against A&M? I'm not making any promises, but the promise is there. Let's say that. The potential is definitely there. So depending on what you feel about Matt Zollers, I think this Missouri offense could maybe open up a little bit. I think one of the biggest things I would have liked to have seen Missouri do against Auburn and Vanderbilt, especially against Vanderbilt, because against Auburn, well, boy, there wasn't much time to throw. But even against Auburn, I thought there were times Missouri needs to look to be more explosive in the passing game, look to take chances down the field, over the intermediate middle part of the field, certainly, but really specifically down the boundary. I'm talking deep routes to Marquise Johnson, to Donovan Alubade, even Kevin Coleman, of course, too. Think slot fades, that type of deal. But balls that can come out of Matt Zoller's hands relatively quickly, and by the way, with his arm strength, it's just another level from what you're going to see from most quarterbacks. So I think Missouri would be very wise to take advantage of that, and also hopefully maybe get a second safety back there on the defense. Soften things up a little bit for Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts in that Missouri rushing attack. I think that's a really important thing to do, because I do think you, once again, have to probably lose the element of the quarterback run at this point. I know Eli Drinkwitz said, hey, we're not going to play scared football. Great. That's an awesome thing to say. I think in reality, though, when you do not have another healthy scholarship quarterback on your roster, you have to protect Zollers a little bit. So I do think that's going to factor into maybe keeping the scoring a little bit lower than maybe people would expect after, once again, looking at those Texas A&M Notre Dame games and Texas A&M Arkansas results. And, I've got more notes coming up here on this Missouri Texas A&M football game, including if maybe the blowout in Kyle Field is actually an advantage for the Tigers. Plus, one of the best players in the SEC plays for the Aggies, and he went to high school at Rockhurst in Kansas City. Did Missouri err by not signing and recruiting this young man? Let's talk about all these different factors coming up here in just a minute. But first, though, I got to tell you about FanDuel, because the NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And even if you miss the tip-off or you just want to ride the hot hand, of course, FanDuel has you covered with live bets from everything on who's going to score the next bucket to who's going to win in the fourth quarter. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up today and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Cashius Howell, by the way, formerly of Rockhurst High School, just did a quick Google of Rockhurst, by the way, $18,000 a year to attend high school in Rockhurst. Unless you're a good football player, like Cashius Howell perhaps was. Not sure what his exact situation was, but I know his college situation. He's now with Texas A&M, and he leads the SEC in sacks and in pressures as well. So Eli Drinkwitz, where the hell were you on this one, bud? Well, I'm actually kidding here because Cashius Howell was way off of the radar in high school, ranked, according to 24/7 Sports anyway, the 30th ranked player in the state of Missouri. Folks, if you're not in the top 10 in the state of Missouri at the very, very least, you're not even getting sniffed at by the Tigers or anybody else in the SEC for that matter. So Cashius Howell ends up at Bowling Green, by the way, and obviously takes off, enters the portal, and is now at Texas A&M. So it just goes to show you that this high school recruiting thing, considering guys can be late bloomers, physically late bloomers, just in terms of, hey, maybe football experience. Again, I don't know what Cashius Howell's story was. I didn't bother to look. The point was, I did know that he was way off of the high school radar, and now here he is leading the SEC in sacks. Wow. That's the good part of the transfer portal, by the way. I do think that guys like Howell who are late bloomers for whatever reason, okay, you wind up at Bowling Green. Well, now obviously he should be at a higher level of football. Should he be forced to sit out an entire season simply because he was a late bloomer in the sport? To me, especially when you're moving up a level like that. We can talk about intra-conference transfers if you want, but especially when you're moving up a level, obviously, from the MAC to the SEC, hard to hold that against anybody and think that they should be punished, in my humble opinion. Well, speaking of punishment, Missouri definitely got punished at Kyle Field last season. That was a brutally disappointing game. I do wonder if maybe that's a slight advantage for Missouri this season. You wonder if maybe subconsciously the Aggies and their squad are maybe thinking this game might be a little bit easier. Again, hey, third string quarterback, Brady Cook's gone, all that stuff. Hey, it was pretty easy last year. Luther Burden's gone. It would be human nature for those thoughts to creep in just a tiny bit. And frankly, it would be impressive on A&M's part if they did not. And on Missouri's side, well, maybe a little revenge factor here, especially for Eli Drinkwitz, maybe for people who were on the roster last season, of course. I will say this, too. If Missouri wins this game, I got to think Missouri is, and again, we got a long way to go. Missouri could get blown out this weekend, and, well, we'll be thinking, maybe we need to hit 8-4, 7-5, and hope for a decent bowl game. That very much is on the table, too. But let's not pretend like a Missouri victory isn't on the table here, too. And if that happens, let's say Missouri wins out. Let's say they beat Oklahoma on the road. They beat Arkansas on the road, beat Mississippi State at home as well. Here's the thing. I've seen this thrown about a lot lately. I think there's a lot of assumptions. Well, if X, Y, and Z runs the table, then maybe 10-2 isn't a sure thing for the college football playoff for the Tigers. Well, sure thing? Yeah, you're right. It's not a sure thing. But still, it seems like it would be a heck of a lot more likely than not. Again, hypothetically here, Missouri wins out. You're telling me beating this Texas A&M team that was number 3 in the country, 8-0 coming in, you beat Oklahoma in Norman, by the way, and then you've got your 2 losses are by a combined 10 points, a 3-point loss to Alabama and a 7-point loss to Vanderbilt. You're telling me that's not good enough to make the CFP? Well, if so, maybe we really do need to expand it to 16 or 64 or 78. I don't know. Maybe we should just go a full-blown March Madness with this thing. I'm obviously being sarcastic here, but what I'm not kidding about is that I would just be stunned if that's Missouri's resume. If they're 10-2 with 2 losses by a combined 10 points, the first and perhaps only team to beat Texas A&M on the season, that isn't good enough. That would be pretty shocking in my opinion, especially when there's likely going to be some upsets down the stretch. I think you're looking at one bid for the ACC right now after Miami was upset by SMU this past weekend. I think even the Big 12 could be looking at one bid for the CFP too, just the champions, and that's it. So you could be looking, I predicted 5 bids for the SEC preseason. That's looking like a pretty solid prediction and a solid bet at the moment. And I think Missouri, again, win out, you're there. A lot has got to go right for the Tigers, and the Tigers could frankly lose out. That's possible as well. Not betting on that whatsoever, but nothing is easy in the SEC from Missouri's perspective, or yes, indeed, College Station and Texas A&M's perspective either. Let's keep all that in mind. This is more like the NFL and not your granddaddy's SEC. And Missouri basketball has officially opened the season now. Of course, the exhibition game against Kansas State. But last night, Missouri opened the regular season at Howard with an 88-67 victory. Mostly pretty easy result for the Tigers, of course. Other than, well, a barrage of 3-pointers to start the second half by Howard at one point. Cut it down to a fairly respectable margin, but the Tigers ultimately pull away. By the way, Trent Pierce sat out again with a lower body injury. Honor Boateng also sat out this particular game with also a lower body injury. I've noticed Missouri going with the hockey-like mystery designations for injuries, even to the point where on the women's side, by the way, Avery Kroenke, it was announced she's out for the season with a lower body injury. Now, we've really gone too far with the secrecy at this point. If Avery Kroenke is out for the year, just tell us if she tore ACL or broke her ankle or whatever it might be. And best wishes, of course, to Avery Kroenke, by the way, who I believe started following me on Instagram several years ago, when she was in high school and thinking about coming to Mizzou. So shout out to the young Miss Avery Kroenke there. But I digress. I got to say, I wasn't a huge fan of the Missouri starting 5 with Javon Porter as your small forward. It just seemed to me like Javon Porter is a decent 3-point shooter, so your floor spacing is okay there. But still, with Mark Mitchell and Sean Phillips, offensively, neither one of those guys is going to space the floor a whole lot, especially Phillips, obviously, is a guy you want at the basket at all times. But Mitchell is also a guy you want to be mostly close to the basket. So to me, putting in Javon Porter there, another guy who is basically a stretch 4, stretch 5 type of player, I thought that was a little bit awkward, and I thought Missouri had a bit of an awkward start offensively, but obviously offense wasn't much of a problem yesterday, and it rarely is in the Dennis Gates era. However, defense, I still have my questions here, and one other big question I think involving Anthony Robinson that needs to be answered this season if Missouri is going to be the best version of itself. So I want to get there coming up. Yeah, I got to talk more about this Missouri basketball game, of course. But you know what? First, let's talk about game time because, of course, college football, we are in the home stretch here. November football, the best kind of football, in my opinion. But you know what's not the best? Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices jumping at checkout when you're looking for college football tickets. Well, that's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. One of my favorite advantages, zone deals. Pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats, and you save big money. Really, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've found to buy tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket. Go download the Gametime app today. So on that somewhat awkward Missouri starting five, I don't want to overanalyze that by any means. Of course, Honor Boating and Trent Pierce, well, those may be two of the more likely candidates, of course. Trent Pierce started a lot at the 3 spot for Missouri last season. Those two guys could certainly slide into that starting 5 and make that a little bit more of a natural fit. So I don't want to overanalyze anything there, but I will say this, just a lot of post-ups from Sean Phillips there early in the game that I wasn't a huge fan of, just kind of bogged down the Missouri offense. Now the dunks by Sean Phillips, this I like. He to me, he's just a finisher of plays, not a initiator of plays, and the latter is what you're asking him to do when you throw it to him in the low post. Of course, 16 points, 11 rebounds, great game, but also 6 turnovers. I think that was to my point on the trying to initiate offense with Phillips. But like I say, hey, you get a 20-point victory in a game where you're obviously experimenting around a little bit. Nothing to complain about too much with the result. And I would say Missouri's big 3 right now is Sean Phillips, Mark Mitchell, and Anthony Robinson. Those 3 guys are almost certainly going to be on the court when it matters the most, when it comes to nut cutting time, if you will. Well, you saw those 3 guys when second half there was about 12 minutes left and suddenly it was a 9-point game. Well, it was those 3 guys out there with Jaden Stone and with Jacob Cruz, by the way, so a little bit of floor spacing to go along with those players too. Also, I thought it was notable that Luke Northweather was had the 5th most minutes played on the team, was also first off the bench for the Tigers. And he's not a 1-for-1 replacement for Trent Pierce or Honor Boating by any stretch of the imagination. So perhaps Northweather ends up playing more than I suspected just a week ago. That is for darn sure. I will say Missouri's defense is one thing I'm worried about. I just think that, not that this is going to be a bad defensive team necessarily, I just think that the structure of this Missouri defense looks very similar to what it's always been under Dennis Gates, which is, just for my taste, too much gambling, too much trapping, too much getting yourself unnecessarily, in my mind, out of position, trying to get turnovers, of course, but to me, at the expense of being in good defensive position and then, getting yourself out of your rotations into scramble mode. A little bit too much of that to me for my taste. I have to say one wrinkle I did like from Missouri defensively, we saw it for just a little bit in the second half, but when Missouri played zone, I liked when Anthony Robinson and T.O. Barrett were in the game at the same time, and they were able to extend that zone out into a full court press. That is an interesting wrinkle with 2 very large, lengthy, and capable defensive guards in Robinson and Barrett. I thought that was very interesting as well. Again, the one negative I will say, Anthony Robinson just 1 of 6 yesterday with 3 turnovers and notably 4 fouls in the game as well. Listen, I think we all know what the best version of Anthony Robinson looks like, and I think we all know that version of Ant is an all SEC type of player and a potential NBA type of player. But quite frankly, I just need to see that version of him more consistently. It would be one thing if this was sort of a one-off for Robinson, this game tonight, but quite frankly, Ant was really, really bad against Drake in the NCAA tournament. And just too often, again, the 4 fouls, just too often he's taking himself off the court. I think this is sort of a pattern and a symptom of the Missouri defensive structure that I'm not the hugest fan of. I just think Robinson, again, he gambles too much, gets himself into foul trouble. When he's right, when he's the best version of himself, when he's getting those steals, he looks like one of the most dominant defensive players in the entire country. But unfortunately, when you're fouling, when you're turning the ball over, when the offense isn't quite going as consistently as we'd like to see, again, he's got to be more consistent if he's going to truly be the best version of himself. That's really as simple as I can tell you there. So anyway, thank you all for joining me on this edition of Locked On Mizzou. I'll be back either Wednesday or Thursday with a crossover episode with our Locked On Aggies guys. So look forward to that. And of course, lots of other analysis on this Missouri football team coming up this week. And I've got a few basketball thoughts that I didn't get to on today's program. So plenty to look forward to the rest of the week on Locked On Mizzou. So until Wednesday, I'll see ya.